In year one, we got to a couple $1,000 in MRR. In year two, we got to $250,000 in ARR. And then it was until the end of year three that we got to $1 million. When we were building Klaviyo, venture firms had these kind of, we'll give you $20,000 and it's like, no strings attached, no equity. We applied to 2 or 3 of these and not one accepted us.
Ready to go? Andrew, I am so excited for this. You don't know this, but I'm like the biggest nerd on your business. I think it is one of the most fascinating businesses in tech. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Eric.
I was thinking about how to make this show as different as possible. I think there's a lot of things in our early years which shape who we are today. What do you think was the most impactful thing in your early years that shaped you most that you maybe haven't shared before?
I'll say 2 things. One is I remember I grew up on kind of in the suburbs and on a kind of a small street. And it's interesting. I think a lot about my parents both worked and I was allowed to just roam around the neighborhood. And, I remember that there were no cell phones. So it was just kind of be home at 5 or 6 and you just had like total freedom. I remember my parents both went to, school or went to work early. So we just walked, by the time we were 6 or 7, we just walked ourselves to school and would just hang out before the bell rang. So I think that kind of independence and just go explore things and figure things out was awesome. And it's actually interesting. I wonder if that's something that we're going to be able to carry forward to, our kids or if that's like, allowed anymore.
Do you know what's really interesting is that Norway is one of the only countries in the world where you are allowed to climb trees as children. And they are also some of the happiest children in the world who learn the fastest. And there is, I think, a strong correlation between that because you fall, get hurt, and realize the errors of your climbing ways and learn.
Yeah, we have the same thing. I used to, played, grew up in the northeastern part of the U.S., in Boston, and we played hockey during the winter. A lot of my friends would freeze their backyards, and yeah, you play some. I don't know, you wouldn't usually wear pads and stuff like that, and you figured things out, right? Lots of cuts and bruises and this kind of stuff, and yeah, I just figured it out.
I love that. What was the second element you mentioned there?
It's funny. I was really big into sports as a kid. But I also had this, dream when I was 5 or 6 that I wanted to be a meteorologist. So I remember I went to this spelling bee with, at probably like the high school or something like that. And I was really nervous because I wanted to meet the guy that was moderating it. And he was the weatherman for the local news, for the local TV news station. And as I remember, he wrote a note for me that was like, hey, I hope your future is bright or sunny or something funny like that. But I think the thing was, I remember every few years I had like a new passion, so one was, it was like, oh, I'm really into weather, and it was tracking hurricanes and stuff like that. And then I remember, I can't remember what movie it was. It came out, I think it was Outbreak. And there was like, I'm really big into viruses and virology and biology, right? And then Jurassic Park came out. And now it's like, oh, okay, it's all about, dinosaurs. So I think this idea of just kind of bouncing around and letting your mind wander, that's definitely something that I've always enjoyed, but just having a lot of these passions and kind of going deep for a year or two. And then, I don't know, you can sometimes just put it on the shelf and maybe come back to it later.
I think it was the Collisons actually who said that like the single best founders, 99% of the time, tend to almost be obsessed about often quite esoteric things, be it like medieval castles in Scotland, weird styles of chess maneuvers or whatever that is. And actually there's this high correlation between these kind of esoteric obsessions and high quality founders. You said there about kind of the meandering mind, so to speak. We mentioned like our prep beforehand. I heard that the Klaviyo business was not always what it is today. And what I mean by that is I heard it was a database for analytics, and it's kind of taken a couple of iterations to get where we are. How do you think about the importance of like early vision, sticking to that vision, and what you start with not being what you are?
When we started, my co-founder Ed and I, we wanted to build something that wasn't just kind of a feature or a small app. We wanted to dream big. And so I think we kind of had this North Star of, well, gosh, wouldn't it be really cool if you could take a person, like the essence of you or me, and take, kind of our surrogate. Now we talk about AI, it's like your agent. And what if you could hook that up to the internet? So, instead of just, the internet being, these fiber optic network, where we can pass around images or text or video, what if it's like you could pass around me? I do think we're not far off from, you and I could have this conversation, and it's actually neither of us that are here present. It's just, but it's us, right? It's, whatever's going on in our brains kind of hooked up. So we knew that that's what we wanted to build. And then it was a little bit of a work backwards. My co-founder Ed is very pragmatic on like, okay, Andrew, but like what's valuable to somebody today, right here, right now? It kind of pulls me out of the clouds. And and so we started out and we said, okay, well, if you're gonna connect somebody to the internet, then you probably had better build something that represents their brain. And so that's where we came with this concept of like, what's a database? And, brains are good at both like deep intellectual thinking, analytical thinking, but also like fast, record retrieval. So we need to build something that's good for that. But then, after we built that, we were just very iterative and we said, okay, well, what is this useful for? It's kind of infrastructure. In the world of software, there's infrastructure and applications. So what application should sit on top of this? And we polled our customers and a lot of them said, oh, well, I'm using this for marketing. So we said, okay, great. Well, that will be the first application, that kind of sits on top. And that's how we got there. And that's, was kind of the bedrock. And now we think about like, okay, great. Well, what other applications could we build that sit on top of this, kind of this multi-purpose database, this kind of brain, so to speak, for a business.
Were you passionate about marketing? We're often told, do what you love, let your passions guide you.
One, yes, because I am, because I think communication it's so important. I mean, storytelling, we all know when, a story is told well, and, it could be something small of, hey, I have this product, like, how do you pitch it? I mean, there's an art to that. The product could be amazing, but if you don't have a use case or can't show somebody how it's valuable, like okay, well, they'll just turn you off. So one, we felt really passionate. It's like, there's so many people creating things, but sometimes people create great products, but it's hard to tell that story right or get it to the right person at the right time. And we'd love to fix that. And that kind of leads to the second part, which was we kind of wanted to get into marketing because, I'm a product builder, and I honestly, we want the best products to win. And I remember people telling me, at some of the companies I worked at, they're like, Andrew, you could build the best product, but the best product doesn't always win. And in some sense, we built Klaviyo to say like, well, gosh darn it, like we're going to level the playing field. Let's build software such that everybody can be good at marketing, and now the best products can win. So there's a little bit of, hey, if we do this right, marketing as a thing, we kind of can level the playing field. Or folks that are great at, building, but maybe aren't great at marketing, like we can help them level up, give them superpowers.
The trouble with that, making it democratized, making it available to everyone, wonderful. But VCs, let's be honest, hate low ACVs, high churn, kind of traditionally lower retention rates. CACs are still pretty high. The mechanics of the SaaS business don't work, baby. And this is why venture investors don't like it. And you have a long tail, like a really long tail. What does it take to make a really long tail work with a lot of customers paying, $5K ACVs? So
I've always liked the kind of mantra that you can look at marketing as, kind of scalable sales. So, I mean, we've all talked to customers where you give them your pitch and you're like, oh man, I'm kind of repeating the same thing over and over again. And you think of like, okay, well, what is marketing? Well, in some sense, marketing is like, yeah, look, it's the template. It's the thing you can put on your website. So hopefully people can learn about, they kind of be sold on their own. So we think about like marketing as scalable sales. Well, a great product should be scalable marketing, because instead of having to, it's a little bit the, show, don't tell. A great product will kind of sell itself, right? Or it'll market itself. So that's what, when we started, we felt like that's what it's got to do. It's got to be so good that, if you sign up for our product, if you start to use it, it's really obvious where the value is right away. It's easy to get there. So it doesn't need any marketing. It doesn't need somebody to sell it. Now, the reality is like, that's an asymptote, right? I mean, we obviously have marketing, we have sales, but the more you can do that, the more you make it easier for yourself. So Ed and I used to say like, boy, by the time we talk to a customer and we actually are working on them on, a sales process, we want them to be so kind of in love with what we built that we're rolling downhill. And so for us, like with Klaviyo, one of the first things we did was especially once we got into marketing, not only did we make it easy to get started, I think a lot of people have done of like, how do you build a great UX? But we also just built, attribution. Like we want, because a lot of people say like, well, especially in enterprise software, well, what's the ROI of this product? Why should I buy it? And we just built that straight into our product. And we put it on the homepage. So when we would finally pitch folks, they'd be like, oh yeah, that's all right. I've actually already seen the ROI. I've done the calculation and I'm ready to buy. This is so obvious. So I think there's a lot you can do with product to just, try to take the things you typically think of as like live in marketing or live in sales. And how can you just pull all of that forward in a product that lowers your CAC? I think that if you pick a product that's kind of a bedrock, that helps reduce churn. And those two things, ultimately, right, those are the unit economics that matter.
So do you think VCs are wrong, essentially, to hate this segment in terms of the long tail, low ACVs because of the higher churn and lower retention?
I think it's harder. The reason we started with SMBs, both my co-founder and I came from enterprise sales, and we would sell to big, huge companies like Starbucks and Bank of America and Marriott, and we saw how long it took to get in there. So I think you just kind of have to pick your challenge. And for us, we just thought that would take a long time. Yeah.
I mean, so obviously I was going through your numbers earlier and I'm looking at them now. And the really interesting thing I thought was also like the $50,000 ACV customers, and this is maybe a couple of quarters ago, so forgive me for this, but it was up 80%. And I was like, holy shit. That's incredible. But how do you think about serving two masters? HubSpot has always catered to the SMB, for example, and kind of very much stays with that as its home. But when you've got the 50K ACVs growing as quickly as you do, and this incredible long tail, how do you serve two masters at the same time?
We've think about this a lot, and we're not perfect at it yet. But I think you just have to think about it as almost two different customers, two different businesses. I think because Ed and I had been entrepreneurs, we knew what it was like to be just starting out. We knew what that felt like, how your every dollar matters, and you're like, anything that takes up my time but doesn't cost money, like that sounds good. Like I'm willing to do it myself. So you're really, it's, every bit of value matters. But then we've also worked with like big companies where we realize, oh my gosh, there's a process and they've got these security requirements and scalability and reliability matters. And the project's going to take 12 months for them to execute. So they're trying to de-risk that. And they're just totally different. The funny part is the technology isn't, for us, I mean, it obviously just kind of scales. It's not really all that different. The product and technology, it's really just matching up with what are the things that matter most to those folks. I've always looked at it as like when you walk in a room to a customer, if you can ask them questions that show that you know who they are, that you're one of them, that's the best way to, open up the conversation. And they're just very different. So we literally we look at them as two totally different types of customers, almost businesses. And then, we're just lucky that we have a product that, the fundamentals of will work for both.
How do you think about effective product marketing then? Because I completely agree. I almost think it's much easier to think about it in those siloed different mindsets. But then when you think about a billboard, for example,
right,
well, you got to put one on it, or an advert online, whether it's a Google ad or an Instagram ad or whatever it is. You got to choose with each destination. How do you think about that?
Where we ended up, we actually experimented with this a couple of years ago. We had this concept of, Klaviyo as a brand would be for our entrepreneurs, founders, businesses that we're scaling up. And then we'd have a separate brand for our large enterprise businesses. And we called that other brand Klaviyo One. And the concept was, hey, we have this great database. We have all these applications, it would be everything you need in one spot. But what we realized, I got some advice that it's that's actually kind of confusing. It's easier to just have one brand for everybody. And then to your point on product marketing, you just have to make sure, whether it's digital experiences or even the events and the things that we do for customers, that you bifurcate those so that you've got a path for everybody. I think a lot of people are willing to, they'll visit, say, your website. And as long as they can find their home quickly, the place that speaks to them, then you're in good shape.
It's so funny. You mentioned that kind of finding your home, and you mentioned the love earlier. It's a very good word, love. Customers love you. And I mean this in the most respectful way. And I've learned to be more honest than I have in prior years. Klaviyo's brand generally, I think, is dramatically underestimated and less known. And then you speak to this segment that you are just adored. But there was one thing that customers didn't love, which was pricing increases. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on what were some lessons from that and how you think about how to do it the right way.
Oh man, so pricing is a hard topic. It's funny. We always thought about we're going to build great products. We're going to deliver awesome experience, and pricing. I mean, for the first 5-6 years, we're like, it'll just kind of figure itself out. I think our tenets on pricing are a couple. Is we try to align as much as possible pricing to the value that we drive. That's why we established this metric, Klaviyo attributed value, like kind of revenue you get from the marketing and messaging you do with Klaviyo, and try to make it really clear to folks like that there's really good return on investment. So that's one. I think like getting those pricing axes right. And then over time, as we've added more features, more functionality, and we've increased that revenue, we've just really, we did our first price increase, like basically since our first pricing change, what was it? I guess last year. And that was like the first one in like 10 years. So I think what we learned from that was, gosh, you have to establish this trust with customers of like, well, here's how pricing is going to work and how to think about that over the long run. And it was great. I had a lot of conversations with customers that were like, hey, look, we're okay with this, but we just want to know, we want some certainty. Like help us understand how you're going to think about this going forward. And so that's something we've done a lot with customers, with partners, just educating them on how we think about the value we provide. And then, how we're going to think about, how they can scale so they can understand their costs, as they grow with us.
Got you. So be super clear about kind of pricing pathways for the future, and then also be super clear about what you drive. And then you can make a much more kind of evident case for why you price the way you do.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Love that. That's tweetable. There's a very kind of interesting element of the business, which is like with this incredible love, great product, amazing customer base, you took the very strange decision not to raise venture money, which really makes my job completely obsolete. Why did you decide to bootstrap when the rest of your generation of entrepreneurs decided to fundraise instead?
Well, there's two answers to that. There's the one that sounds great, which is, in my family, a bunch of my aunts and uncles and, my grandparents, they were entrepreneurs. They ran small businesses. And I always felt like, well, from day one, they had to make money. They had to be profitable. Ed was similar. And so for us, there was this streak of, I think software, it's high margin. If we're really good at building, if we get close to customers, you ought to be able to build a profitable business, from the start. And obviously that gives you, some more flexibility, some more control. So that's kind of the lofty answer. The other answer was, when we were building Klaviyo, we'd applied to all these venture firms, had these kind of, we'll give you $20,000 and it's like, no strings attached, no equity, for the summer. And so we applied to a bunch of these when we were about 6 months in. And at the time we had real users and customers were like, oh, we'll be a layup. We applied to 2 or 3 of these and not one accepted us. So I remember going to Ed and saying, hey man, if we can't get the, $20,000, check, why do we believe that we're going to be able to raise, $500,000 or $1 million, which is what a seed round was back then. So he said, you know what, like, let's just try to do this ourselves. So I think it was a mix of those two things.
Do you think Klaviyo would have been successful if you had raised a 5 on 25 seed round? And would you have done things differently?
I would like to think we wouldn't have done things differently, but I'll tell you this is my advice to a lot of entrepreneurs is don't take more capital than you need, because the constraint, breeds a lot of creativity. My routine in the early days was I'd wake up, I'd log into our help desk, our support software. I'd answer customer questions for an hour or two, or sometimes a couple of hours if, there was some real issue. And then I would get to coding. I always felt like that was a great pattern, because if there was some painful problem with our product, some feature that was missing or some bug, I mean, that was obviously the first thing I was going to fix that day, because it meant the next day I wouldn't have to spend all my time answering questions about it. And that viral loop of customers to code to back and forth was awesome. So there's things like that you just learn how to do that I worry if you go too fast and you say bifurcate those roles, and let's say that engineers never talk to customers, then all of a sudden you lose all that magic and it probably makes you less efficient. So yeah, I don't know. I'd like to think that we would have done it the same way. And we did once we actually raised some venture capital. At that point, we were just like, look, it's kind of just, it's cushion in our bank account. But yeah, my advice is always try to keep it raise as little as you need, because really good things will happen from that.
What part of the business do you think would have been better if you had money earlier?
We probably would have grew our product and engineering team faster. I kind of enjoyed writing a lot of the code, building and designing features, in the early days. But I think if there was a point at which, we knew what we needed to go do, and, rather than me just keep chipping away at it, I remember when the first couple of, Klaviyos, especially on the, product engineering side started, man, we got a lot more done. So I would have done that sooner. I think a lot of people would have given us advice, and I probably was, too naive or didn't understand this part yet. They would say like, hey, you could, there's a real there. You have product market fit. You probably should invest more in sales and marketing. And I think that probably could have gone a little faster too.
How quickly did you get to $1 million in ARR?
For us, we started on January 1st of 2012. In year one, we got to a couple $1,000s in MRR. So say maybe $20,000 in ARR. In year two, we got to $250,000 in ARR, which was a huge jump, but we were still, I think that was around the time where we felt like, okay, we could maybe hire, one or two people. And then it was until the end of year three that we got to $1 million. So that was 36 months where I think for 80% of it was just two of us. And then I think we then had the first couple, couple folks join with us.
It's so weird that, I'm friends with Daniel at UiPath, and I had him on the show. And he was slower than you, so don't worry. He was 9 years to 480K in ARR. 9 years. Thank God he was in Romania, otherwise there's no way you could afford the cost base. Mm-hmm. But I'm just going again. I'm a venture investor for a living. I'm challenging our assumptions where it's like, hey, the best really hit 10 million ARR in 18 months. That's kind of the core benchmark of what really great is. And I just look back at some of the best businesses and I'm like, fuck, are we wrong completely?
If you know what you want to build and you've got a good plan, the capital is really helpful. You can go faster. But we probably could have gone faster if we had invested more. But I think there's some real magic in taking your time to get the product market fit right, really, build up that customer love we talked about, because that really does compound and snowball. I think the most challenging part of, say, a software business, SaaS business, is if you rush too fast to try to force revenue growth, sales growth, but the product market fit isn't there. There's a lot of companies that have tried that, and you never really get it great. There's a couple that figure that out, but that's why I think a lot of these companies that, end up, building really enduring and build great, community and product market fit, it's because they took some time to get it right and then really believed in the laws of compounding that, yeah, hey, if I can really solve this well for one person, that's okay. There are thousands or millions of other customers, in our case, businesses out there that don't look all that different. And yeah, then we can take it to them.
I totally agree with you. How much were you at in revenue when you raised your first money?
It's probably a little bit right around when we hit 1 million in ARR. And the reason we did it was we were self-funding, bootstrapping. We were hiring folks, and Ed and I, we used to look every week at our bank account, and we'd literally just pull it up. It's like a little bit like looking at your checking account, but it was just for a business. And there was this big sawtooth pattern of, it would kind of bump up, day by day over the course of the month, and it would drop to almost zero when we paid our server bills and, ran payroll. And so this big sawtooth pattern. And so we would literally forecast out when we could hire the next person based on how much we thought the business would grow like in the next month. So we tell people, it's like, hey, look, we'd really like to work together, but I actually need you to wait like 6 weeks because we may not have the cash to fund this. That seemed like a really bad idea. So that's when we said, it'd be really nice if we had, a seed round at the time was maybe, $1 million, maybe 2 million if it was bigger. And we said, if we raised the seed rounds, boy, then we wouldn't have to worry about this problem anymore. And that's the reason that we ended up raising it.
How much did you raise and what was the price?
We raised $1.5 million, and we weren't super, formulaic about it. We made a couple of like kind of silly mistakes. I started out with going back to, folks that I'd worked for, CEOs, CTOs, and asking them, it's like, hey, we've kind of built this business. Would you be interested in writing us an angel check? And they said, yeah, of course. And then I asked them, okay, well, and also, do you know like who are the good seed stage VCs? Because we hadn't spent any time, meeting these folks. And they said, sure. So I got introduced to a couple of folks around Boston. And from there, we thought like $1 million sounded good. So we did $1 million, and there was like a little bit from these angel investors. And then when we were figuring out the price, I was glad, thankfully, like safes had come into existence, maybe a year or two ago. So it's like, okay, we'll just use this, this kind of new format. And then what I'd heard was, hey, if you were raising a seed rounds, I don't know, like, 10x ARR was kind of a lot if you had, if you had a little bit of traction. But we felt like because we were profitable, we're like, okay, well, we could double that. So, I remember asking, like, hey, look, I know 10x is the normal thing. Can we do 20x? And again, it wasn't really scientific. And this seed investor we were working with just said, yeah, sure, that sounds good. And that was it. The silly mistake we made, actually, which was, it didn't really matter much, but because we were profitable, we also said, okay, cool, so we'll negotiate the price, but hey, we actually don't need the cash right now. So, it's actually okay if you want, like, you can just send it to us in a few months. So we used to laugh about that, of like, we should have just, waited another 3 months and we would have, I don't know, maybe doubled revenue, and we could have raised it a higher cap. But I don't know, we've never tried to be perfect with fundraising. We've always felt like if you can find people that are value add, that'll be helpful, like as kind of advisors, as mentors. Those are kind of like the best people to have on your cap table.
What was the big cash injection? Was it Ping and Accel?
No, the first big round for us was with Summit Partners, and then Accel the year after. But we raised that $1.5 million, and then probably about a year, 2 years later, we added 5 more from the same investor. And then we went like a bunch of years where we probably scaled to about, I think it was around 50 million, 60 million in ARR before we raised our next round. And that's when we knew that was going to be like, it was just going to be, we probably had 10x at that point. It was going to be a different order of magnitude.
What was that round then when you're at 50 million in ARR?
How was it priced?
Yeah, well, what was the size and price?
I think it was a little over 100 million is what we raised. And, again, because we were profitable, I think there was a mix of, there was primary capital and there was secondary to existing investors. And I think we actually ran our first tender then. I know that's gotten more popular, but like, I think we ran a tender for everybody too. But anyways, that was, so that was around 100 million. And I think we sized it based on what we thought, because at the time, the kind of wisdom was like, hey, it has to be around 20% of the company. So I think that's kind of how we backed into the size. And the price, man, I'll probably get this wrong, but I think it was around 800 million. And the logic was, we always had the same logic with fundraising. It was kind of like, hey, look, if whatever the kind of going market multiple was, because we were profitable, we'll be like a little bit ahead of that. But we never really tried to push the price, that much. So I probably got some of those numbers a little bit off, but that was like kind of the rough order of magnitude.
Can I ask, you mentioned there kind of a mixture of primary and secondary. Any big lessons for founders on the importance of secondary, for founders to take, for team members to take? Any advice that you think is important for them to know when they have that option at their disposal? We've
always had the thesis that like, if private companies, if there was more liquidity in the stock, we always felt like that was better. I mean, we weren't a public company, but if you the more often you could do that, if there was some cadence, that was fine. That was a very healthy thing. So after we did that, I think that was our Series B. I think we ran a couple of others. Some were coordinated around like about fundraisings, and some I think we had cash on the balance sheet. And I always felt like that was a great way that for folks that were really invested in Klaviyo. It's like for some of them, I mean, they grew up their careers at Klaviyo, and they were sort of like equity was a big part of their wealth creation. And it felt like to let folks do that along the way. I mean, I heard all sorts of great stories of folks, paying off student loans, right? Putting a down payment on a mortgage. So that was great. I guess my advice is I don't overthink oh my gosh, will people be demotivated? I think it's actually, it's a positive thing. And then it actually set the way that when we went public, I think a lot of folks were like, well, yeah, now it just feels like when you're public, it's like, hey, it's kind of what we've been doing, but just now the stock's even a little bit more liquid.
Are you ready for some tougher questions, Andrew? I
Sure.
spoke to some brilliant friends, and they gave me some insider tips. And they said a big needle mover for the company was when MailChimp was kicked out of the Shopify ecosystem, and you'd kind of hung around the hoop long enough and were a good enough partner that when that happened, it was like the golden moment for you. Can you talk to me about that, hanging around the hoop, and your lessons from kind of being around the hoop and being there when necessary?
I think that event, we ran some analytics on this, I think, a while ago. And there was definitely, there was a bump, but I think people were surprised at how much there was kind of already these big, huge tailwinds, and that, accelerated a little bit. But it wasn't the step change that a lot of people thought. My kind of learnings from that were, twofold. One, I think we had kind of shown that in the world of data-driven marketing, and especially as applies to retail, we had all these folks that loved us, and there were a lot of folks that weren't aware of us. They didn't know who we were yet, but when they found out what we did, it didn't take them a long time to figure out, oh, we've got a really great product. And so when that happened, we just saw, it was almost like a bump in awareness. All of a sudden, people were like, oh my gosh, I have to find something else. So there's this, being ready, having a great product, leading with that, and then, investing in marketing, or in this case, having the marketing kind of happen to you, I think is a good strategy. So make sure you sequence those things the right way. The other is, I've always felt with partnerships, partnerships are such a huge part of our business. Obviously, we've got a great relationship with Shopify and with others. I've always felt with partnerships, it's like a tug of war. I mean, and not in a competitive way, but if you need for a string to stay tight, my metaphor to our teams has always been, you need two people pulling on both ends of the rope. And that means that there has to be this kind of, economic incentives that line up. There has to be good, if you have products, they have to work well together. Customers care about that. In that case, it felt like we had great alignment with Shopify because, we were helping, their customers drive more sales, which was accretive to both, our customers, to Klaviyo, and to Shopify. And that was like a great, everybody wins situation. So I think with all partnerships, if you can set those kinds of things up, I mean, if it's a win-win-win for all sides, that's the best of all worlds. And what you want to avoid is things where I think sometimes it's like a win-lose. There's a lot of partnerships where maybe it's really good for one side, but it's kind of a no-op for the other side, or it's not really good for the customer. It's not bad. It just doesn't really matter. And I think those are the kinds of partnerships you can spend a lot of time on that don't go anywhere. So we've always tried to just, find things where everybody's pulling, to keep the rope tight. And if you can find those work best.
So the rope is tight. Okay. I think Toby learned, I think he said this publicly before, that maybe he hasn't, in which case I might have to edit it out and I'm screwed. I get an angry email from Toby and the Collisons. But one of his big regrets was actually letting Stripe into the Shopify ecosystem and not being more dominant in controlling a relationship there. I think he answered that publicly. My question to you is, they then buy a chunk of the business. Talk to me about that process, how you thought about that, whether you saw that as just kind of the pulling of the rope. How did that go down?
I've always kind of, the analogy I've made is it's a little bit like when you're, dating, and then finally you kind of get, you formalize it, right? You get married to some degree. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's kind of like that.
Does Toby just call you up one day and say, hey, this is working, let's make this happen, and we want to put in, $100 million?
It was more gradual than that. I mean, we'd been working with, Toby, Harley, and the entire Shopify team really on the product side for a long time. And, then started to be a little bit on the marketing side. I always felt like if you've got this really good, partnership, if you can figure out the product side, the kind of go-to-market side, and then the financial side, if you can get all three of those things lined up, that's the best of all worlds. And, we knew they were adding a lot of value for us in terms of just literally recommending Klaviyo to folks. We felt like we built a great product, but hey, I mean, again, people didn't know who we were yet. And they were saying, hey, look, this, hey, what works well, what integrates well with Shopify? Hey, you should go check out Klaviyo. So we felt like there's this kind of consummation, but it was always, it was right. It was a very gradual thing. And it was, I think, I don't know, one day I remember it was sometime during COVID. And we just said like, if we're both in this for the long run, why don't we just make this more formal so that we all have, skin in the game together? And as another example of where like, I think it was just like it was a win-win-win, right? It was, valuable to Shopify, valuable to us. And I think to our customers showed that like, hey, these kinds of partnerships can work. One of the fun parts with that is we've then taken, actually one of the probably best, or there were a lot of great things that came out of that. But an interesting thing that happened was a lot of other, partners that we had, both inside and outside of retail said, wow, we love the way that you've worked with Shopify. That clearly is working. It's accretive to everybody. Can we replicate that? I think partnerships they're kind of they're a newer art form in software. Like a lot of, these SaaS, like how do we work together? Are we complementary, or are we, are we on each other's turf? I think this kind of helped make it clearer that like, no, there's a real positive, like, kind of symbiosis here. And we've actually started to take that to, other verticals and other industries and use a little bit of the template.
I totally see the alignments. You drive more value for their customers love it and love being on Shopify with that. You get lower CACs. Are there any misalignments?
Not really. Like I said, this, one of the things, it relates to this, hey, we have to be, the rope has to be tight. We're both working on, kind of, keeping it taut. I think partnerships can go sideways when folks just aren't upfront with each other. What are you going to be great at? And it's actually okay if there's like a little bit of overlap, but the more you can kind of clarify that, the better. And I think, certainly with Shopify and others, I think we've just been very upfront. And it bleeds over a little into our ecosystem. Like we try to, we have a lot of, folks that integrate into Klaviyo now, and we try to do the same thing of just be very clear about, hey, these are the things that we're not interested in, where we need help. And these are the things that we think are core competencies. And I think if you can just get all that on the table, things go a lot better.
I'll never forget when I had Toby on the show, and I think Harley said, you'll have great fun. If an IP address was a human, it would be Toby. And I was like, that's a great intro. I'll remember that one. Listen, with this like blossoming partnership, amazing growth, you have the ability to go public. And I mean, thank fuck for entrepreneurs like you, Andrew, because as a venture investor, I was sitting there going, God, who's going to go out in this market? And then respectfully, it's like, I will. And I'm like, great. Why did you decide to go public when you did, when, seemingly it was a bad market?
We try to take a very long view. I used to tell, our folks at Klaviyo and even external investors, I was like, because people ask all the time, when will you go public? I said, look, I know we'll get to 2030. We'll have grown, we'll have built a great business, great products. We'll delight a lot of customers. I know we'll be a public company, but I probably won't really remember what year it was. So so it won't be, it's not gonna be a long time, but it's gonna be somewhere in this like, early 2020s. So we did that and we're like, well, we know it's gonna be at some point. And I've always had this belief that if you know something's coming and it's going to be a bunch of work, like you might as well just do it. So a big part of it was we were just ready. We knew we were in good shape as a business, and we did feel like there were, as we were working with larger businesses, larger customers, we knew there was some value in folks knowing that like, hey, we were in it for the long run. And I think that's actually kind of played out. Like I've talked to a lot of folks now and they said, hey, look, it's great to know, that you guys are, you really are, you're a profitable business.
Can you talk to me about building the buy book? In the process, you've got to go out and you've got to sell to institutions. We mentioned selling and marketing earlier and storytelling. It's a different story you need to tell when you're building that buy book on going public. How was that process and what did you learn?
I make the analogy that like, so one, everybody talks about a roadshow, but the reality is you meet everybody, 3 or 4 times leading up to that. So it's more like you're seeing people that you already know. So in some sense, the roadshow should feel, if I think done well, it's a little anticlimactic, hopefully. That's one part is you're meeting folks, but then along the way, I've always subscribed to like, you will get the investors that you deserve. And so if you are clear about what you want to do with your business, and for us, we're going to be long-term oriented. We're focused on high growth, but doing it efficiently. We're going to be product led. We're going to get close to customers. We have these ambitions around, being the brain for a business and all these other applications we want to build. I think if you're clear about what you're going to focus on, both in the short and long run, you'll find folks that line up with that. And that's actually the best thing, because what I've felt this with our private investors and public investors. You want everybody to know where you're aiming, and there are no surprises. So, anyways, I think that's how we thought about building up the book. And then, it's interesting. You get kind of to the finish line, and there's lots of great folks to work with. And I think it always felt to me like you do this thing where you raise a seed round and there's like lots of people involved. And then for us, when we did our series A, B, C, it was all one investor. By the time you get to the roadshow, you're kind of back to like these party rounds where there's going to be lots of people you're raising from. And so it has kind of this weird, back to the beginning feel of, there's, 20 or 30 folks that you're spending time with, and just sharing what you're up to. How
did it feel when you IPO'd?
I remember sitting with our general counsel the night before. I told him, it's like, I think probably the best analogy is it feels a lot like a wedding, honestly. I mean, two things are true. The advice you get when you get married is like, there's going to be a lot of people there. It's going to go by fast. You're not going to remember much of it. Like, it'll be fun, but actually it's just a lot of pomp and circumstance. So I remember feeling it's like, boy, that actually is pretty accurate. I think what was important for us was we went to New York. We had a great time, rang the bell. But then we wanted to get back to our office. And, I always felt like, we're like, okay, we're going to have one party. We don't really celebrate fundraisings, but this one's probably worth celebrating. We're going to do it that night. That's the end of it. And then we're back to work tomorrow. And I remember going to bed that night. And I think the text message I got from my wife the next morning was, hey, before you go to work, just reminder, just make sure you take out the trash. So, it was very much like, hey, this is a fun day, but you go back to what you were doing. It's kind of a fun moment to celebrate, but then you're back at it.
One is a wealth creation moment being the IPO, and the other is a wealth destruction moment being a wedding. But I appreciate the alignment. But yes, absolutely, you're right. Can I ask you, how does your role change? Do you have to do different things when you're a public company CEO versus before? And how do you think about that transition?
I don't think not a lot has changed for me. I'll say the two things that I think have been, real positives, just on a day-to-day kind of operations basis. One, I think there's a lot of smart folks that have studied a lot of software companies that are public market investors that you just, now they're on your cap table. So you spend time with them and learn how they're thinking about things. And I think that's interesting. The second is as a private company, and especially a bootstrapped one, I think the great part about bootstrapping is you tend to do all these little habits that like really help make you successful, like the staying close to customers, being scrappy, being frugal. I think some bootstrapped companies, maybe because they don't have, they haven't raised as much capital, sometimes they're not as rigorous on, they're kind of successful in spite of some other things. One of the things I've liked about being public is it just gives us an option of like, well, hey, look, there's this kind of quarterly check-in, and that's a thing that happens. And actually, that's a positive for businesses. Like you need to set some milestones and know where you're aiming.
Pre-going public, what were you successful in spite of?
Oh man, there were so many things that were under-optimized. We did a lot of things right, but across the board, like we weren't super rigorous on maybe how we built software. It was obviously scalable and secure and all this kind of stuff, but in terms of building, long-term product visions, or, a lot of the way some of the ways that some of our marketing programs we were just figuring it out at the time. I think great products really do, they will sell themselves. Customers will come to them. So it can hide a lot of things that you could be better at. I think what's been great though, the analogy I always use is, it's like, imagine you're like a sprinter, and imagine somebody, is running the 100-meter dash, and they run it and they have terrible form, but their time's pretty good. Or imagine that they run it and their time's good, but their form is great. Like, you'd rather be the person that has kind of, okay, their arm is kind of hanging out to the side and they could actually probably go faster. And I always felt like that was, we're constantly working on that stuff, but that's stuff that we had these opportunities that were right there. And I think as we, in the run up to becoming a public company, and it's something we obviously work on now, is, okay, how do we continue to get better and better and better form? We're also just pretty tough on ourselves.
Can I be blunt? I speak to so many very, very smart people, and everyone is aligned in thinking that you're dramatically underpriced. And they go, I don't get it. The growth is there. The scale is there. I don't get it. And I'm looking at it too, and I'm going, I don't get it either. And I guess my question is like, how do you respond to that? There are not many freaking companies growing at 39% with your revenue and with your numbers. Can you help me, a naive person, understand why you are priced the way you are and why you see multiple compression when maybe others don't that have worse businesses?
I don't know the answer to the stock market. I'd probably be in a different line of work if I did. We've always looked at it, market cap, share price, all this kind of stuff will take care of itself. Companies fundamentally get valued on, either revenue growth and then ultimately, free cash flow or profitability. And if you just keep growing those things, then you're in good shape. And I think we think about, well, what makes us believe that will be true long into the future? I think there are products that are core to a business. And it's either because for a particular function or for an area, they're kind of a tent pole, or it's because, hey, you're core to, how a business drives growth, how, for our customers, how they drive revenue. What I've always been excited about for us is we're like right in the middle of both. When you're storing all the data for a business, when you're kind of the center of how they think about marketing, and then if you can tie that back to actual results, like customers are going to be pretty happy with that. And then ultimately over time, like that's going to lead to more customers, revenue growth. And if we do that, I think ultimately like you build up a track record that, folks externally can see, and everything kind of takes care of itself.
When you think about the future and you think about expanding the free cash flow and you think about expanding on the efficiency and becoming better and better, what are you most excited for? Like if we put forward how does it 10x from here? How does it 10x from here, Andrew?
Oh, there's so much. I mean, there's two basic dimensions for us. One is, I think every consumer business should be running, building, growing on top of Klaviyo. We have this picture that we show from time to time that, if you, Phil Knight, has this great line in his book where he talks about seeing somebody wearing a pair of, Reeboks or something, and he just gets upset. And so we talk about that a lot, that like we kind of just get upset when we see other people using software that's not ours, not because of ego so much, but just because we think we built such a great product and it's only going to get better. So I think there's millions of businesses around the world, not just inside of retail e-commerce, all of like the consumer economy that would benefit from Klaviyo. And then on top of that, man, what we're helping them solve today, with marketing and messaging and storing data and understanding it is great, but there's so much more that we can do. We think about that in two dimensions. There's so many other interfaces between a business and consumer that we can help, where we can make that a better, richer experience. And then also, when it comes to machine learning or, artificial intelligence, I think so much of the software of the future, it's gonna be able to, play itself. We think about software that is actually, you use it better because you don't have to be the user. I think that makes, even what folks are doing with what we're doing, even on the marketing front, way more valuable. So when we think about, all the people that we can help, plus the other applications, plus the fact we can make them better at using each of those applications, that trifecta, I think there's, at least a 10x, probably a lot more in there.
So when we think about kind of the introduction of AI as an exciting new enabling technology, which I think it is in this respect, do you agree with Sarah Tavel's perspective that we will see a future where you sell the work and not the tools? If you think about current technical tools now, Klaviyo being one of them, we sell tools that enable people to do the work. And she suggests that over time, you will just sell the work and you will pay for the output. Do you agree with that perception?
I think that's generally the right direction. I'm maybe a little skeptical of how fast, we get there. But I do think if you fast forward, 10, 20 years, I think there's a lot of processes where, hey, I just need the output. And by the way, some of these we already do today. I mean, there's obviously parts of our personal lives or running a business where we can effectively automate that away. And we're happy to pay somebody to do it. When I think about machine learning and artificial intelligence broadly, there's kind of three core principles that we have. The first is, being a physics background, I think the laws or the algorithms that govern how the world works are discoverable. When I think about the way that we as humans use software or try to execute various processes, we can understand. We actually define those. We can codify those, so we can understand those. The second part is, I think for a lot of things that we as humans do, if you look at our algorithms once you've documented them, they're actually like really naive and inefficient. And that's not anybody's fault. It's just, a lot of these things we don't practice that much, or maybe we've practiced a lot, but compared to what a machine could do, there's just a lot, there's a lot of room for optimization. We also believe that if you look at a lot of the algorithms that we use, if you use data and obviously software to then try to understand, well, what would be an even better algorithm for that process, that's very possible. So take it in our case in the world of marketing. I talk to a lot of marketers and we ask them, hey, how do you spend your incremental hour in the day? Like, how do you decide how to optimize your time? If you're using expected value or something like that, like how do you decide what to work on next, which project? And a lot of them say, well, I've kind of got this notion of what I should be doing, but actually I'd love some advice. We think that's something that's like ripe for machine learning and AI to just say, here's where you should aim. So we think we can discover these processes. We think through data, we can build even better versions of that to say, hey, here's how you really should be doing it. And I think the third part is we think then that adds up to, at least a 2x, right? 100% productivity boost. And in some cases, it might be infinite where the work just goes to zero. And I think, so that's kind of our strategy when it comes to AI. And I think then it's like, is that, and I think you can get to this world where, hey, if you can automate a lot of that way, you can literally just say, hey, here's the output I'll deliver for you. And somebody can say, great, I want to spend, zero time or very little time on it.
Do you think AI actually enables you to make more money from customers, though, or just provide a better product? I think me and Jason Lamb can talk and debate a lot about whether your large enterprises, your boxes, your Dropboxes, your Klaviyos of the world will actually be able to extract more juice out of customers, or in a horrible terminology, apologies for that, or just provide a better product, but they pay the same. And it's just a kind of commoditized technology product that enables them to have a better product, but pay the same.
I think there's two fundamental forces, kind of working in opposition. One is, I think all technology is fundamentally makes things easier. So there's a deflationary element to it. And so there's this constantly, you have to, as multiple people build the same tool set, right? Hey, that makes it, that fundamentally should make it better for those customers. On the flip side, as you build better and better tools, better functionality, it is increasingly valuable. So I think for us, like, we're so far away from the total value that we can bring to our customers. And we know that it's so profitable for them. A lot of the conversations I have with folks are, Andrew, we're eager to see that next world, and we'd be happy to pay for it, but just how long is it going to take for it to exist? So I think in our case, I think there's a lot more value there. And, if you index, pricing to that, I think there's a lot more there. With some, we'll see with some software categories, I think they're not, if you look at the way they're using AI and maybe specifically language models, it's more of this, it's kind of this productivity, will help you, click the buttons faster, like navigate, the UI, or maybe you do it through natural language. I think that's like a nice to have, but if you can actually measure, the lifts, the increase in output, and then you can put a dollar sign on that, that's something that customers really understand. And I think that's like another level of value beyond just the, you can do your day job quicker.
You mentioned the final one before we do a quick fire. I've loved this. You mentioned the deflationary element there, kind of with the productivity gains. Klaviyo outperformed HubSpot last quarter. I guess my question to you is like, is the economy less bad than people think? Are people missing something about the economy when you look at how consumers are actually buying, behaving, transacting?
From what we've seen from our view of the consumer is I think people are being more thoughtful about how they spend. But interestingly, and we shared this stat last year, we're finding that more and more consumers are building deeper relationships and more loyal relationships with the businesses and organizations and brands that they love. So there's this interesting thing going on where, well, consumers may be more thoughtful about spending overall. They're tending to concentrate it in a handful of companies that they really love. And I think that's interesting. I think it's a little bit an interesting lens on the economy, is that if you're a business, it's really about how do you deliver great experiences to the customers that you have, and once you acquire somebody, how do you make sure you also go deep with them? I've always thought it's interesting. In the world of retail and e-commerce, it's still even for digital. For e-commerce online, there's still a very traditional retail mindset of, well, I drive traffic. It's not foot traffic, it's web traffic. I convert some fraction of it, and that's the basic funnel of my business. I think increasingly a lot of those businesses are recognizing, well, it actually can look almost pseudo recurring, where I have customers, I know who they are, they come back, I'm building, some cadence with them. It actually makes my business more durable and more resilient. So that's the trend that we're really interested in, obviously trying to accelerate.
I get nervous when I hear that. Pseudo recurring on consumer transactions, on like consumer preferences and buying patterns. Oof. I don't know. Like, ServiceNow is a great business. You know why? Because it's like 3-year contracts, and even with shit products, you can't leave. I've got Bill coming on the show, so we might have to edit that out. Otherwise I'm screwed. But like, I just look at like Peloton as a really interesting example, where the customer love is off the charts, but actually business is in the dumps. There's a hard thing there with the transaction being like, there's infrequent transactions. You buy a bike, you have the subscription model, but like,
I've always felt in the stack ranking of business models, the best ones are, transactional is obviously hard for the reason you're saying, because there's no commitment to the next purchase. Anything that's subscription or recurring is great because there's kind of this auto on piece to it. But the best model, and this is, you have to have a really great product to do this. An even better model is something that's, I used to think of it as like a utility, like water or electricity. Like, of course I'm going to buy that. Everybody started calling it consumption, so we can call it that. And yeah, it may fluctuate a little bit, but I've always felt like the best business models out there are, you have a product that's so good, you actually want to reduce friction for people to use more of it. And you're willing to float a little bit with, the ups and downs of, the economy broadly. But I guess you're trading off are you willing to accept some variance for the upside and the downside versus just the straight predictability?
I think the best are when you have customers who are so in love with your product that they're willing to pay ahead for it. And what the paying ahead for it does is allows you so much flexibility. And I always think of Starbucks with this, and the float that they have from their loyalty cards is probably one of the biggest secret weapons in the financial mechanics of that business. That is true power.
We've always felt like, even if we're business in general, one of the things we really pay attention to is, I've never been as big of a fan of LTV to CAC as a measure, because I feel like it'd be too long term. You can have high upfront costs that sort of, it takes you a really long time to earn back. When we were bootstrapping, we always thought about the cash cycle. Like, if we invest $1 today, how long is it going to take for it to come back? And I think it's the exact same, right? So, describe Starbucks as, hey, every time, especially in retail, if I invest $1, how long does it take for me to pay back? And obviously the best is like, yeah, folks will, if they'll pay up front in software or, load up dollars for later.
Andrew, what did you learn about that cash cycle? Because I find it really hard to try and understand as an investor, because it's highly variable. And year 1 is very different to year 3 when you have a brand in an ecosystem, and maybe the cash cycle's quicker. What were your big lessons from that cash cycle and how it changed over time?
For us, it was always about just understanding it and then trying to do what we can to minimize it. So I'll give you one example where that was really helpful to us. When we started working with a lot of marketing agencies, And one of the things we found is just from a business perspective, it was actually, not only could we help them grow their business in terms of offering services on top of Klaviyo, but when they'd refer business to us, that was a great model where we could pay them for referring business, but we shared in but the cash cycle was very fast because it wasn't, the same thing where you pay a sales rep and you pay them all up front and you just have to amortize that out. In this case, we could sort of pay them as a customer grew with us over a set period of time. So there were all these things where we would look at what were strategies, for marketing or sales or some of these partner plays that would allow us to minimize that. And that's part of, when we thought about the capital required to grow Klaviyo is if we could keep that low, then we could grow really quickly and wouldn't have these big capital needs in order to fuel that growth.
It's funny, I had Aaron Levy on the show recently, and he said that his big reflection or lesson was that you can be kind of strategic or intelligent around the cash mechanics of your business, which can really allow you a lot of levers in terms of not having to fundraise as much, not taking as much dilution, poor Aaron, and actually being able to have a much more kind of capital efficient cash flow business in that respect through the mechanics of cash flow. Mm-hmm. Super interesting. Listen, I want to do a quick fire. I could talk to you all day. So I say a short statement. You give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
Sounds all right.
Okay. So what have you changed your mind on in the last 12 months?
I used to be a believer for our products that I've always hated the term omnichannel because it felt like everything matters all at once. And so I used to unabashedly think that, hey, when it comes to marketing, there's only a couple of mediums, media types that matter. I've definitely changed how I think about that now. I mean, we added SMS as part of our product set, and now we're thinking of adding a bunch of other formats and other ways that folks can use Klaviyo. I think in the future, for consumers, there should be these multiple interfaces that people can touch and feel. And rather than, I used to think there was a big power law of there's only really one or two that matter. But I think that's changing, for a lot of our businesses.
Okay. You can add anyone to your board. Who do you add and why them?
Oh, I've got just tremendous respect for Microsoft as a business. Obviously you study great companies and, we talk about Klaviyo being this, database and applications. I've always thought about, Windows and their applications, so Bill Gates, or there's a lot of great folks at Microsoft. I think folks that have saw that, grow up from the 80s and 90s, man, that'd be awesome.
When I say near-death experience with Klaviyo, what moment comes most viscerally to mind?
So we didn't have any real near-death experiences, but I remember in year 2, we had our biggest customer left us, and it was right around the holidays. I remember it was right around Thanksgiving. And, it was pretty crushing in the moment. It was the kind of thing, that's why co-founders are good. You kind of rally from it, and we eventually got them back. But I remember at the time that was like a 20% hit to our, $20,000 a month MRR, and it felt huge. But I think you learn from that, if you just keep focusing on the right stuff, eventually you get there.
Where do you feel you still need to improve as a leader?
Oh, I spent a lot of time trying to be I use the word storytelling, but getting comfortable just explaining why we're all here, why it's worth working so hard, and then how we're going to get there. The number one question I get from folks, both internally and externally, is, can you just tell me more about, where you think we're going and what it's going to take to get there? I think telling that story through, metaphor and through examples, tightening that up, work a lot on that.
Why do you think Shopify won where so many others didn't? Your WooCommerce, there's so many players in that market. Shopify rose and everyone else sank.
I've always admired Shopify for two things. One, an extreme dedication to the craft of building great products and delivering really high quality products. I think in the world of e-commerce, if you've ever tried to set up a website or an online business and it's just, it's your Friday night project, it can feel like a lot. And so making that super simple makes a big difference. And I think that those gains extend not just to folks starting out, but actually folks in the enterprise want the same thing. And then the second is, I've also always admired the way they build their ecosystem. They were unabashedly, hey, every part of Shopify is going to be extensible. So if you want to develop against it, you can. And when we first started working with them, it was just so easy to, share what we built. I remember building a little connector and they got it right away. So I think if you take this, ecosystems matter, they're going to be part of our strategy. I think we've seen a lot of great companies, you mentioned Microsoft, Salesforce, Shopify. I mean, they've all had that as a core component that's allowed them to extend what's possible without building it themselves.
How important is it for founders to have personal brands?
I think it's something you can decide if you want or not. It's never been a big priority for, myself or my co-founder, Ed. I think where it's most interesting is if you feel, we really believe in paying it forward. I've worked with so many great people that have been mentors to me. I often think of personal brand as you can share what you've learned and then people can decide what they like or don't like, and they can borrow from that. So I think if your goal is to, pay it forward to others, that's a great reason to have it. And then there's probably certainly a halo effect of, folks will say, oh, that's great. Well, I'd love to spend more time with that person. And, hey, maybe we'll join forces. But I don't think it's very important. I think it's often overemphasized by founders in terms of being successful. A lot of customers, that's not what matters to them. What matters to them is, can you deliver a great experience and a great product?
Does money make you happy? When you IPO, when you build a business like Klaviyo, your financial situation changes. Does money make you happy?
There's sort of a minimum amount, a threshold after which things, the wealth stops really mattering. One thing I've loved about my co-founder Ed and I is we've always found joy in, kind of simple or non-extravagant things. So no, that's something that I think in my personal life with our family, it bleeds over a little bit into Klaviyo, recognizing that look, people, the time you spend together, how you do it, that's really what matters the most. And in some sense, I think the financial side, the best thing there is if it allows you to spend more time with the people that you like spending time with, that's probably the best benefit.
It's funny. I sat down with a Russian friend of mine and I said, how much money does it take to be happy? He said, not as much as you think. I'm like, well, how much? He goes, 400, 500 million. I'm like, oh, that's a little bit more than I thought. Oh, okay. I'll go back to work tonight. Thank you so much, Igor. Okay, final one for you, Andrew. Tell me, what question are you not asked that you think you should be asked more?
It's how do you fall asleep at night? And by which I mean how do you turn it off? I've asked this of a lot of my of other founders and mentors is when you get really excited about something, eventually you have to kind of put it on the table and go to bed. And I think that's tough. So it's a little bit of how do you compartmentalize where you can have an off switch. At least for me, my actual answer is probably listening to some audiobooks or podcasts at night. But I think finding
if
these
you suggest you go to sleep listening to 20 VC, I'm deeply offended.
I think I actually struggle. I struggle with many podcasts because I always worry I'm going to miss something really good and then I'm not going to listen to it in the morning. But yeah, it's that, or I've always been a big fan of getting outside. I do a lot of running, but whatever it is, exercising into something that kind of forces your brain into a totally different direction. And maybe to tie it all the way back, this being curious about other things. Yeah, I mean, I'll often unwind or fall asleep to, learning about topics that just have nothing to do with, what I'm working on day to day. I've gotten very big into, I don't know, for whatever reason, European and even, British history through some podcasts. It's just a fun thing to learn about, but it totally takes my mind off of, whatever the project du jour is.
Andrew, listen, I've loved this. I so appreciate you kind of going with my meandering thoughts. This has been amazing, and you've been such a great guest to have on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.